Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Allison's Corner. As always, I am your host Allison and welcome to today's episode. So, today's episode we are talking all about church culture and personal beliefs. And this one is one that I was a bit timid to record because I was trying to find the words to really say what I wanted to say without stepping on some toes, but also speak my truth and speak the truth of many people because I really want to talk about what happens when you grow up and you start thinking for yourself. And I really want to say this at the beginning so that it's very clear. This is not a bashing church episode. This is not me trying to convince you to believe anything different. This is just me. And this is me being real about the process of growing up. Because if you grew up in the church, especially if you were like me and you were deep in it, okay, you already know that church is not just something that you go and attend. Church literally shapes the way that you think. It shapes how you see the world, how you see yourself, and it shapes what you think is right, what is wrong, and what can be acceptable and unacceptable. So it doesn't just become religion. In a lot of ways, it becomes identity. And your identity, as we know, is powerful. So if you are like me, if you were a church girl, are a church girl or a church boy, and you are like, I'm rethinking some things. And listen, again, we're not bashing, we're not deconstructing here. It's none of that. But you have some thoughts. Listen, just sit, listen to today's episode. We're going to get into it, y'all. So, I want to start off by saying when you grow up in something that strong, there comes a point where you really do have to ask yourself, okay, what do I actually believe? And you have to ask yourself that because it's not what you were taught. It's not based off of what your family believes. And it's not based off of what the people around you might expect. But you truly have to dig deep inside and ask that question. But sometimes it's not as simple as it may sound. Because for a lot of us, there was never space to question. You just followed. You went to church because that's what your family did. You believed certain things because that's what you were taught, and you acted a certain way because that's just what was expected. And for a long time that worked because when you're younger, you're not really thinking about it like that. You're just living inside the world that you were given. But then you grow up and life gets so much more complex. You meet different people, you experience different things, and you start seeing the world outside of the version that raised you. And so now things don't always look and feel as black and white anymore. And I think that's sometimes where the tension starts because now you're in this space where what you were taught and what you're experiencing, they don't always align as perfectly as you want them to. And that, listen, that can feel very uncomfortable. Actually, I'll be honest, it can be very confusing. I want to talk about myself for a little bit because I think I really started asking a lot of these questions when I went away to college because that was my first time away from home and away from my parents. And I, of course, have always grown up in the church, always went to church, always believed the things that I believed. But I think being away from my parents and being put in a surrounding that was different from what I had previously challenged a lot of the beliefs that I held dear. And I want to say I don't think that's wrong at all. I challenged whether or not I believed in God. I challenged what church meant. I challenged what my beliefs held. And I challenged if those same beliefs that my parents taught me were the ones that I still wanted to continue believing. Now, I also want to say this. I still go to church. I still attend it on a weekly basis. My relationship with God reflects what it is that I believe and also what the Bible believes. But I will admit, does it look slightly different than what I was previously taught? Absolutely. And I had to research and find things out for myself to really combat what it was that I was feeling at that time. And I think that's important when you grow up in church is that you have to ask those hard questions that sometimes we don't always know how to articulate. And in me asking those hard questions and me challenging what I had always been taught, on the other side of that, I became a stronger Christian and my life reflects what I was challenging. Because Allison, who went away to college and was questioning everything at that time, and the Allison that you're listening to now are two totally different people. But I will say that my faith in God has definitely grown stronger and it has matured because of me asking those questions. And I want to say if you are someone who is now asking questions, it might look like, do I believe this because it's true to me or because it's just what I've always known? And y'all, that is a very hard question because it requires a huge level of honesty, not something that's just surface level. It requires you to really sit with yourself and really ponder on it. And sometimes when you start asking those questions, if you are like me, you start to feel guilty. And you feel like you're doing something wrong just by questioning it. And even thinking differently might be looked at as a form of rebellion. And I think a lot of us have experienced that in some way. Because when your beliefs are tied to your community, questioning them can feel like you're disconnecting from people. It could even look like you're disconnecting from your family, from tradition, from culture. And I don't think anybody, nobody really prepares you for that part because we talk a lot about finding yourself like it's this beautiful, freeing thing, but we don't talk about how lonely it can feel sometimes. And when you're in that in between stage, not fully who you used to be, but not fully settled into who you're becoming, it can make the journey even more difficult. And I think church specifically is one of those spaces where that tension shows up the most because it's not just about belief, but it does become about belonging. It's about structure and it's about community. And again, it is about your identity. So when your beliefs start to shift, even slightly, it can feel like everything is shifting. And I want to talk about something that doesn't get said enough. You can still value where you came from and question parts of it at the same time because those two things can exist together. Because I think sometimes we feel like we have to choose extremes. Either I accept everything exactly how it was taught to me, or I reject all of it completely. But in real life, we usually land somewhere in the middle. And you might still believe in God, but think a bit differently about certain teachings. You might still appreciate the foundation you were given, but you recognize that some things don't fully align with who you are anymore. And that it doesn't make you fake. It honestly makes you very honest. And I think the part of growing up is realizing that your relationship with faith is just that. It is all about being honest. And most importantly, it is your relationship, right? Your relationship with God is not based on your parents. It is not based on your pastor. It is not based on your community. It is solely based on you. And relationships evolve. Over time, they deepen, they change, and like anything, they go through phases. So, why wouldn't your faith do the same thing? I also want to acknowledge something that's important, and that is that this process can be very scary. Because when you start forming your own beliefs, you don't always know where you're going to land. And uncertainty, listen, uncertainty, oh Lord, that's uncomfortable. Especially if you were raised in an environment where everything felt certain, where all of your answers were clear, where right and wrong were very defined. So, in a lot of ways, stepping into a space where you're like, hey, I'm not really sure, that can feel like instability. But I don't think uncertainty is a bad thing. I believe that uncertainty is part of growth, because what uncertainty does is that it forces you to engage, and it forces you to think, it forces you to reflect, and it forces you to even decide. For me, I think one of the biggest shifts for me personally was realizing that faith is not supposed to be something you just inherit, because faith is something you have to develop. And with development, it takes time. It takes you asking questions. It takes you having certain experiences, It even takes moments where you don't fully understand what is going on. And I also think culture plays a big role in all of this. And in particular, I want to talk to people who are in the Black church, um, and especially how that can look, because communities where church is deeply rooted in identity, it doesn't just become about what you believe, it's also about how your beliefs are sometimes perceived. And again, we got to be real, because sometimes the pressure isn't even direct, because nobody has to say anything, but sometimes you just know, you feel it. Because you've grown up to believe that's what's expected, and that's what is accepted. And the things that kind of raise eyebrows. So even when you're questioning things internally, externally, you might still be moving in the same way. And a lot of times that can create a disconnect, because you're living in two spaces at once: who you're becoming internally and who you're expected to be externally. And y'all, that is exhausting. Trying to navigate both, trying to stay true to yourself while also maintaining relationships and community and familiarity is a lot. And I'll be honest, I don't think there's a perfect way to handle that. I really don't. I think it's something you just figure it out over time. You have to be, again, honest. You also have to give yourself grace, and you have to be patient. no matter what the outcome is. And I think one thing that helps is removing the pressure to have everything figured out right now. And as I always say on this podcast, and I know I sound like a broken record, you do not have to have it all figured out. Trust me, in any area of your life. Because a lot of us feel like if I start questioning, I need to come to a conclusion immediately. No, no, you do not. You are allowed to be in progress. You are allowed to try and find your way through it. You're allowed to say, hey, I'm still learning. I'm still figuring it out. I'm exploring what this means for me. And I want to also say this, it doesn't make you lost, it makes you engaged in what it is that you're going through. And I think at the end of the day, what this all is alignment. Because making sure what you believe actually needs to align with who you're becoming. And you can't do that out of pressure, out of fear, out of obligation, but you can only do that out of truth. And I'll even be honest with this, truth can look different for different people. And I think that's something we have to learn to respect more because everyone's journey is not going to look the same. And that's okay. So if you are in a space right now where you're questioning, reflecting, trying to understand yourself on a deeper level, I just want you to know that you are not wrong for that. Listen, you are growing and you are learning every day. And growth doesn't always look clean, you know. Sometimes growth doesn't always look certain, but it is necessary. And you're allowed to take your time with it. So yes, church, culture, beliefs. It's just not about what you were taught. It's about what you choose to carry forward. And that choice that you make, that is personal. Now, I know I said a lot and I want to give you some time to marinate. But before we go, I do want to leave you with a quote from Philippians 4, verse 8. And it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. If this episode resonated with you, send it to someone who might be in that same in between space. And as always, God bless. Have an amazing day. And thank y'all for listening to Allison's Corner.